The chandeliers glowed like 100 tiny suns above the ballroom, catching every shimmer of crystal glass, every polished smile, every ounce of self-importance in the room, and then one voice ripped straight through it. "Get out of here." The laughter that followed wasn't soft. It was sharp, gleeful, a pack reaction. And at the center of it stood her, the millionaire's wife, in a crimson dress. Her grin stretched wide as she tilted her glass just a little too casually. The wine didn't fall by accident. It struck his suit in a dark red splash, a stain blooming across gray fabric, a statement delivered in front of 200 witnesses. The black man didn't flinch. He simply stood there, broad-shouldered, composed, as if the cold spill wasn't soaking through his shirt, as if the jeering behind him didn't exist. His jaw tightened once barely. Then he reached into his pocket and lifted his phone to his ear. Behind him, the crowd erupted again. Some pointed, some whispered, most just laughed. It was a particular kind of laughter, the kind that came from people who were certain they were safe, certain they were superior, certain they knew exactly who did and didn't belong in a room like this. "Look at him," one woman in a matching red dress snorted. "Probably snuck past the door staff," another chimed in. A man in a tux leaned forward, smirking. "That suit looks rented." The millionaire's wife stepped closer, chin raised, voice honeyed with cruelty. "You should leave before someone calls security. This is a private event." He said nothing, didn't defend himself, didn't wipe the spill, didn't even face her. He just listened to the phone ringing in his ear, the faint hum of the ballroom fading behind the steady breath he held. But his eyes, steady, calm, unshakable, were doing something else entirely. They were remembering, because this wasn't the first time a room full of rich strangers tried to shrink him, and they had no idea how many rooms like this he had built, funded, or saved. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to him. The ringing stopped, someone answered. He spoke so quietly the mockers had to lean in to hear it. "It's time." Just 2 words, barely a whisper, but the tone steady as bedrock sent a ripple through the air. The crimson-dressed wife blinked, thrown for half a second. The group behind her glanced between one another. The pianist in the corner missed a note, because something in the room had shifted, something they couldn't name yet, but would feel fully in exactly 12 minutes. The man lowered his phone. A bead of wine dripped from his lapel to the polished floor. He finally turned his head toward the woman who'd thrown it, and he smiled, not kindly, not angrily, just knowingly. The kind of smile a storm gives a coastline seconds before it hits. The laughter didn't die all at once. It faded in uneven ripples, the way sound pulls back before a wave breaks. Some guests were still chuckling, others were whispering. A few simply stared at the man with the wine-soaked suit, unsettled by a calm they couldn't quite explain. He lowered the phone slowly, as if the entire ballroom were moving in slow motion around him. The millionaire's wife folded her arms, chin high, basking in attention. "Did you call your little friend to come get you?" she asked, voice bright and poisonous. Her audience giggled on cue. He didn't answer, but the silence he held steady, deliberate, made several people shift in their shoes. It wasn't the silence of a man embarrassed. It was the silence of a man measuring the room. A waiter approached timidly, a towel in hand. "Sir, I can help you wipe that off." Before he could finish, the woman in red waved him away with a flick of her wrist. "Don't bother. It won't make him fit in any better." The waiter froze. Someone behind the group murmured, "That's too much." But the words were swallowed by the room's uneasy hum. The man still didn't react. He simply brushed one drop of wine from his lapel and looked toward the grand doors, as if listening for something only he could hear. Across the ballroom, a pair of guests who had been watching closely stepped closer together. "Did you hear what he said on the phone?" one whispered. The other frowned. "Yeah, it's time." "Time for what?" The woman in red strutted around him in a slow half-circle, performing for her friends. "You know, this event is for partners only," she said, tapping her manicured finger against her champagne flute. "You can't just walk in here and pretend you belong." Again, no anger from him, just that same quiet presence like bedrock under a storm. The pianist in the corner hit another wrong note. Even the chandeliers seemed to flicker slightly, as if reacting to the tension shifting beneath them. He finally lifted his eyes to the small crowd forming around him. His voice, when it came, was level. "Are you done? A simple question, but it cut deeper than any insult thrown at him. The woman blinked, caught off guard for the first time. What did you just say? He rolled his shoulders once, loosening the fabric of the wet suit. I asked if you're done. I'd like to finish my evening. A man in a tux laughed too loudly, trying to reclaim control of the moment. You're bold, I'll give you that, but this isn't your kind of place. From the edge of the gathering, a younger woman in black, someone who had stayed silent through the mockery, stepped forward. I think, her voice wavered slightly, I think he actually is on the guest list. Several heads snapped toward her. The woman in red narrowed her eyes. What are you talking about? The young woman swallowed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I saw his name earlier. I was checking arrivals. He's listed, high priority. The crowd stiffened. A beat. A shift. A fracture in the certainty that had fueled all their laughter. The man didn't smile this time. He simply met the young woman's eyes and nodded once. Gratitude, quiet but unmistakable. Behind him, the ballroom's double doors began to open. Someone important was arriving. And for the first time all evening, the people who had mocked him felt something they didn't expect. Not superiority, not amusement, but fear. The ballroom doors eased open with a soft hydraulic sigh, letting a slice of cooler hallway air spill into the crowded space. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Even the woman in red snapped her attention toward the entrance, expecting someone worthy of her theatrics. Instead, it was just a coordinator, clipboard in hand, earpiece lit, walking quickly toward the center of the room. Still, something about her pace made people straighten their posture. She reached the man with the wine-stained suit, leaned in just enough for only him to hear, and whispered, "Sir, confirmation received. They're en route." The room didn't hear the words, but it felt the shift. The woman in red let out a brittle laugh. "Oh, please. Now you have staff? What's next? You going to tell us you own the place?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was watching the coordinator walk away, tapping something urgently into her tablet, and each tap landed like a tremor under the polished marble floor. The young woman in black, the one who had dared to speak up, took a small step closer. I'm sorry about earlier," she murmured. "They shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Her voice shook, but the conviction didn't. It made the people around her recoil slightly, because an apology from someone inside their own circle felt like betrayal. The man finally turned to her. "You saw my name?" She nodded. "Yes. Priority flag. Gold tier." Murmurs erupted again. The woman in red snapped like a whip. "Gold tier means nothing. He probably sneaked into the system somehow. People fake QR codes all the time. Man bisher Grunde approval." Another chimed in. "Ballrooms get infiltrated every week. Security's too soft." But that was when the lights above flickered, not dimming, just shifting. The kind of shift that happened when the venue updated its internal control settings. A subtle reset. A system override. Someone noticed. "Did the network just change?" a guest whispered, checking his phone. "It kicked me off Wi-Fi," another complained. The man with the soaked suit lifted his gaze toward the chandelier. He knew the timing wasn't random. The coordinator had reached the side of the room and was now speaking quietly to two security supervisors, real ones, not the decorative guards the venue hired for show. Their postures changed instantly, straightening, adjusting radios, scanning the crowd. They weren't looking for him. They were looking for the people around him. The woman in red stiffened, noticing the attention shift. "Why are they walking over here?" she hissed. Her husband, still across the room, scrolling through his phone, froze as a notification popped up. His face blanched. He looked toward his wife, then at the man she had humiliated, horror creeping into his eyes like spreading ink. He mouthed something she didn't catch. A warning, maybe, or a plea. But the man in the gray suit remained still, letting the room catch up to what he already knew. Someone from the back finally said it aloud. "Something is wrong." Not wrong like a spilled drink. Wrong like the entire power structure in the room had just tilted. The woman in red stepped back without meaning to, gripping her empty wine glass like a lifeline. What's happening?" she whispered. He met her eyes, calm, measured, unshaken. "The evening," he said softly, "is starting." A hush settled over the ballroom, thin at first, then tightening like plastic pulled over a flame. Security hadn't reached the group yet, but their presence, steady, purposeful, was enough to rattle the ones who'd been laughing moments earlier. The woman in red tried to reclaim her footing. She lifted her chin, scoffed, and snapped. Stop staring like you're someone important. You're just a guest who doesn't know his place. The words had a tremor now, not confidence, fear wearing lipstick. Still, the man didn't respond. He simply shifted his weight, letting the wet fabric cling to his shoulder, the stain still spreading like a bruise. His quiet unsettled her more than any argument could. Say something, she demanded. Don't just stand there acting superior. But he wasn't acting. He was remembering. A flash fast, sharp cut through his mind. Age 17, standing in a convenience store in Atlanta, accused of stealing a bottle he hadn't touched. The owner grabbed his backpack, dumped his notebooks and honor roll certificates onto the floor, and told him he was lucky the police didn't have time for kids like him. The same tone, the same certainty, the same refusal to see him as human. The ballroom snapped back into focus. The woman in red stepped closer, voice rising. You hear me? You don't belong here. People like you never do. It hit harder than the wine, not because he believed it, but because the room went silent the second she said people like you. Every face changed. Some stiffened with guilt, some with recognition, some with the sudden realization that they were now standing on the wrong side of history. Before she could add another word, the young woman in black broke forward again. That's enough, she said louder this time. You don't get to talk to him like that. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She had crossed a line her peers never dared to touch. The woman in red wheeled toward her. Are you serious? You're defending him? Yes, the young woman replied, steadier now. Because I saw his name, and because you're humiliating him for no reason. The last thread of the woman in red's composure snapped. She slammed her empty glass onto a nearby table, the crack echoing. He's nothing, she screamed. Nothing! The room flinched. The man finally lifted his eyes to hers, and for the first time, he spoke. If you truly believed that, he said quietly, you wouldn't need to shout. And that single sentence, calm, measured, devastating, was the moment the crowd realized. She hadn't humiliated him. She had exposed herself. The doors behind them opened wider. Security was closing in. And the real unraveling was just beginning. The crack from the glass still echoed when the murmurs finally died. Not a soul moved. Not a fork clinked. Even the pianist took his hands off the keys, the last note trembling in the air like a warning. The woman in red wasn't just angry now. She was unraveling. Security! She barked toward the room, waving her arms wildly. Get over here and remove him. He's disturbing the event. But the supervisors continued walking with purpose. Yes, but not toward him. They were circling the crowd itself. People noticed. A few shifted. A few stepped back. The woman in red didn't. She planted herself in front of him again and jabbed a finger at his chest right at the stain she created. You think being quiet makes you powerful? That calm little act? She laughed, high and sharp. It just proves you're used to being walked over. Still, no reaction, which made her louder. Look at you, she sneered, standing there like some statue. You don't even fight back because you know you have no power in a room like this. A tremor flickered through the crowd. It was one thing to insult a man, another to say it with the confidence of someone who thought she owned the air. He closed his eyes for a moment, just long enough for another memory to slice in. Age 23, first day at an investment firm, wearing a suit he'd saved 6 months to buy. A senior analyst mistook him for a delivery driver and told him to use the back door. He'd used the front anyway. He'd stayed late anyway. He'd become the youngest partner anyway. Back in the ballroom, he exhaled once. The young woman in black could no longer stay silent. You're humiliating yourself, she said, stepping between them. He hasn't raised his voice. Not once. But you. Stay out of this, the woman in red snapped, spit catching the light. She shoved the young woman back, not hard, but hard enough to draw a collective gasp. That was it. The room reached its breaking point. The man finally stepped forward, not aggressively, but with a stillness so controlled it felt like gravity itself obeyed him. Don't touch her again, he said. Soft, measured, a tone that landed like a verdict. The woman in red froze mid-breath. Something in his voice, its weight, its precision didn't belong to a nobody. Her husband, still across the ballroom, typed something frantically into his phone. His screen was glowing. His face had drained of color. Wait, he whispered, too late. Wait, don't. But the security supervisors had already arrived, and they weren't looking at the man in the wine-soaked suit. They were looking at her. The room finally, undeniably understood, The night had just turned against her. The security supervisors stopped beside them, boots planted firm on the marble floor. The one in front, a broad-shouldered man with a slate-colored badge, glanced once at the wine-soaked suit, then at the woman in red, whose confidence was draining faster than the color in her face. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "we need you to step back." Her mouth fell open. "Me? Are you serious? He's the one causing trouble?" The supervisor didn't flinch. "We've received a priority notice about a disruption in this area, and you match the description." A wave of whispers rolled through the ballroom. People who had laughed minutes ago were now stepping aside, wanting distance not from the man they humiliated, but from the woman who'd led the mockery. Her husband pushed through the crowd, face tight. "Claire, stop talking." But she was too far gone. "No," she snapped. "I'm not stepping back for anyone. Especially not for—" She never finished the sentence, because the man she'd drenched in red wine finally reached for his phone again. And this time he didn't hide the call. He tapped a single contact. The phone rang once. "Go ahead," he said quietly. The ballroom shifted again subtly, but unmistakably. A tiny indicator on the chandeliers blinked as the event's network rerouted. The venue's control system pinged, and every staff member with an earpiece stiffened like they'd just been given marching orders. Claire looked around, confused. What is he doing?" Her husband buried a hand over his face. "Claire, please stop." But the voice on the other end of the call was already speaking clear, authoritative, impossible to ignore. "Sir, protocol is ready. Do you want us to proceed with the freeze?" Gasps burst through the ballroom. Protocol. Freeze. None of those words belonged to a powerless man. The young woman in black, still shaken from being shoved, watched him with a mix of fear and awe. Claire staggered back a step. "What freeze? Freeze what?" The man lowered the phone slightly, letting every syllable fall like a stone into the center of the room. "Freeze the deal." A single beat of silence followed, then the ballroom erupted. "What deal? He can't be talking about that deal." "No way. Is he part of the board?" Claire spun toward her husband. "What is he talking about? What deal?" But her husband wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the man she had soaked in wine, like he'd just realized the gravity of the mistake and the size of the man they had underestimated. The man on the phone brought it to his ear again. "Yes," he said softly. "Start it." Lights shifted once more, and the night began to break open. The ballroom lights flickered again, not dimming but recalibrating, as if the entire venue had suddenly decided to stand at attention. The chandeliers steadied into a cooler, cleaner white. The music faded into silence. Staff along the perimeter lifted their heads at the same moment, like a single machine receiving the same instruction. No one breathed. Claire, still clutching the empty wine glass, looked around, panic crawling up her throat. What is happening? Why are the lights changing? Why is everyone listening to him? Her husband swallowed hard, because that call he just made wasn't to customer service. But the man in the wine-stained suit kept his eyes on the room, not on her, not on anyone in particular, just watching the slow shift of faces as the truth crawled into the open. A tech coordinator rushed through the side doors, tablet glowing with alerts. She whispered urgently to a security supervisor, who then nodded and spoke into his radio. "Confirming. Priority override authorized. Executing the freeze on all contract channels." Gasps fractured the silence. Claire spun, furious. "Contract channels? Freeze what contract?" No one answered her, because every whisper was now about him. "He has override access?" "That's board-level clearance. No executive level above that, maybe." "Wet. Isn't the deal tonight worth billions?" Her husband's face twisted in horror. "Claire, the deal they're freezing is the one we're here to sign." The crash of realization hit the crowd like a dropped marble column. Claire shook her head wildly. No, that's impossible. He's just—" But she couldn't finish the sentence, because the young woman in black stepped closer to the man, voice trembling as she said, You're not a guest, are you?" He turned to her, not with a smile, not with superiority, but with a quiet nod. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." The words struck deeper than a shouted confession. The tech coordinator approached him directly, ignoring everyone else. "Sir, the freeze is active. Legal flagged the contract for immediate review. Your executive instruction is logged." Executive instruction. The phrase rippled through the ballroom like a chill draft. Claire backed away until her heel brushed the base of a floral arrangement. "You can't do this," she whispered hoarsely. "You can't just stop a deal worth billions." He tilted his head. I already have. Her husband's knees nearly buckled. All around them, the room was rearranging itself, not physically, but in hierarchy. People who had mocked him now avoided eye contact. People who had pointed laughed now clutched their drinks with trembling hands. The laughter was gone. The arrogance drained. The truth rising like a tide they couldn't outrun. And in the center of it all, he stood steady. Not elevated, not loud, but unmistakably in control. The night wasn't ending. It was just about to break open. The ballroom no longer felt grand. It felt like a courtroom one where the verdict was already echoing through the marble floors. Claire's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts as she stared at the man whose suit she had drenched with wine. This is crazy, she stammered. Someone tell me this is a joke. But no one answered. The tech coordinator's voice cut clean through the murmurs. Freeze confirmed. Contract terminated pending executive finalization. Terminated. The word detonated in the air. A deal worth billions gone in under 2 minutes. Claire's husband lunged toward the coordinator. You can't do that. We've spent a year negotiating this partnership. She didn't even look at him. Sir, please step back. This instruction didn't come from us. Her eyes flicked toward the man in the wine-stained suit. Claire saw it. Everyone saw it, and that was when the first person in the crowd turned away from her. A quiet, instinctive movement. Someone choosing not to be seen standing beside her anymore. Then another, and another. Like the room itself was retreating from the woman who had just set her own future on fire. Her voice cracked. You all saw him. He's nobody. I humiliated him because he looked like he didn't belong. That's not a crime. Silence. Cold. Absolute. It wasn't what she said. It was the way she said it. Every syllable dripping with the assumption she'd worn like perfume all night. The man finally lifted his eyes. Not with anger, but with a quiet finality that felt heavier than rage. You didn't humiliate me, he said. You exposed yourself. A tremor ran through Claire's knees. Her fingers slipped from the stem of her empty glass. The young woman in black stepped forward again, voice clearer than before. You treated him like trash because you thought he had no power. You thought no one would care. She shook her head. But everyone cares now. A ripple of agreement moved through the room, soft but unmistakable. Claire's husband grabbed her arm. Claire, stop talking, please. Security tightened formation around the man in the gray suit, not to protect the room from him, but to give him space. Authority radiated from them like heat. He exhaled once and said, activate internal audit. All communications. Tonight's recordings. All of it. The coordinator confirmed instantly. Audit activated. Live feed sent to the board. Claire's face broke. Board? She whispered. What board? What board would listen to you? He turned fully toward her, then calm, steady, unshakable. The board, he said. That answers directly to me. Her world didn't just crack. It collapsed. And the room watched it fall. The words hung in the air like a struck bell, clear, resonant, impossible to ignore. The board that answers directly to me. No one moved. Not Claire. Not her husband. Not the guests who had pointed and laughed. The ballroom felt like it was holding its breath, afraid to inhale and disturb what was unfolding. Then a notification tone chimed from the venue's overhead system, an alert normally used only for executive arrivals. But tonight, it wasn't announcing an arrival. It was identifying one. A voice, polished, automated, unmistakably official, spoke through the lobby speakers. Executive chairman on site. All departments adjust to priority level 1. The crowd jolted. Executive chairman. Not partner. Not investor. Not board member. Chairman. Claire's hand slipped from her husband's grasp. What did it say? She whispered, as if hoping mishearing might save her. Her husband's face went pale. It said what I feared it would. Another alert flickered across staff tablets. Name. Clear as daylight. Elias Carter. Executive chairman. Apex Global Holdings. 3 people gasped at once. Someone dropped a fork. The pianist stood from his bench, stunned. The woman in black covered her mouth, tears forming not of sadness, but the overwhelming shock of witnessing justice turned the entire room upside down. Claire shook her head violently. No, he can't be. Elias Carter is a billionaire. Elias Carter doesn't look like... She caught herself too late. The sentence died on her tongue, but the meaning was loud enough to echo off the walls. Elias finally stepped closer, not menacing, not triumphant, simply certain. "I don't look like what?" he asked quietly. Claire backed up until she hit the edge of a table. I didn't mean I wasn't saying—" "You said exactly what you meant," he replied. Her husband, trembling, attempted a weak gesture of apology. "Mr. Carter, we had no idea." Elias turned to him with a calm that cut deeper than fury. "You didn't need to know who I was," he said. "Respect shouldn't depend on a name." The room absorbed the truth like a slap. A hard one. Security shifted formation again this time, forming a polite but undeniable barrier between Elias and the couple, not to protect him, but to ensure no further humiliation touched him. A final alert blinked across the venue screens. Contract with the Wentworth family. Terminated. Reason. Executive instruction. Claire's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair, staring at nothing. Her empire gone. Her pride publicly shredded. Her assumptions turned into her downfall. And Elias Carter stood in the center of the room, quiet, dignified, unshaken. The revelation wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It simply ended the night and began the consequences. For a long moment, the ballroom didn't breathe. Not a whisper, not a shuffle, just the quiet collapse of every assumption that had held the room together. Then the shift began. Soft at first, people straightening their posture, sliding their glasses aside, clearing their throats as if hoping the smallest noises could make them invisible. It didn't. Nothing could, because Elias was no longer just the man in the gray suit. He was the name printed on half the contracts in the room, the signature that kept lights on in 3 continents, the authority that answered only to itself. One guest, a man who had laughed the loudest earlier, slowly lowered his gaze, pretending to study his cufflinks. Another woman discreetly stepped away from Claire's table, distancing herself as though humiliation could be contagious. The young woman in black held her ground, though her fingers trembled. She met Elias's eyes with something rare in that room, respect without fear. Claire finally looked up, mascara streaked, her voice thinned to a rasp. "Mr. Carter, please, you've made your point. Isn't that enough?" Elias didn't reply immediately. He took a slow look around the ballroom, absorbing the faces guilty, ashamed, suddenly aware. It wasn't about making a point, he said. It was about clarity. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Tonight, every person here saw how quickly some of you laughed at cruelty, how eagerly you joined in, how confidently you assumed who belonged and who didn't." Several guests flinched. A few looked away. He continued, tone even. "Power doesn't expose character. Moments like these do." Claire's husband stepped forward, wringing his hands. We apologize deeply. My wife acted out of ignorance." "She acted out of comfort," Elias corrected. "She believed humiliation was something she could hand out like party favors." Claire broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't know who you were," she whispered. Elias shook his head slowly. That was the problem. The line hit the room like a gavel. Behind him, the coordinator approached with a tablet. "Sir, the board has acknowledged the termination. They've issued full withdrawal from all Wentworth contracts, effective immediately." A dozen heads snapped toward Claire and her husband. Their empire, already wounded, had just taken its fatal blow. Elias gave a single nod. "Document everything." The coordinator vanished back into the staff lanes, already executing his order. The crowd parted as Elias stepped forward, not because he demanded it, but because the room's hierarchy had rearranged itself permanently. Claire sobbed into her hands. Her husband stared at the floor, hollowed out. And the rest of the ballroom stayed frozen, watching the consequences settle like dust after an explosion. Elias didn't gloat. He didn't sneer. He didn't weaponize the moment. He simply allowed it to be seen. Because tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The air in the ballroom felt different now, lighter for some, suffocating for others. Conversations didn't restart. They reformed, hushed and uneven, like people relearning how to speak in a room where their confidence had just been stripped bare. Elias stood centered, not claiming the spotlight, but unable to escape it. Every eye flicked to him, then away, like they were afraid of being seen staring at the truth. The young woman in black, the lone voice who had dared to push back earlier, took a careful step toward him. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner." He turned, meeting her eyes with the first gentleness he'd shown all evening. "You spoke when it counted." She exhaled shakily, relief loosening her shoulders. And the crowd noticed it, the shift in standing, the recognition. Her courage had repositioned her in the room more than wealth ever could. A guest near the back cleared his throat. "I saw everything," he said, raising his phone. "If the audit needs witness statements, I'll submit mine." Another guest nodded. "Same. We all saw how she treated him." A ripple spread, dozens of small acknowledgments breaking the silence. Not excuses, not defense, just truth surfacing, carried by people who realized neutrality was no longer an option. Claire, blotched with tears, looked around desperately as the room she once commanded slipped from her grasp. "This isn't fair," she whispered to no one in particular. "He's ruining us." A woman nearby shook her head. "No, you ruined yourselves when you assumed he was beneath you." Claire flinched harder than if she'd been struck. Her husband approached Elias cautiously, voice strained. "If there's anything we can do to repair this—" "There is," Elias replied. The room froze. Claire's eyes lit with desperate hope. "Name it," she breathed. Elias looked between the two of them, seeing not just their fear but the long trail of entitlement behind it. "Learn," he said. Just that. One word. But it landed with a weight more punishing than any demand for money or apology could have been. Learn what respect looks like when it isn't tied to wealth. Learn what dignity means when you can't buy it. Learn what power sounds like when it doesn't need to raise its voice. Claire broke down, covering her mouth as if trying to hold in a scream. The crowd looked on not with cruelty, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding that justice wasn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it was a mirror. Elias stepped back, letting the moment sit, letting the consequences settle. And as he did, the room's allegiance shifted again, gravitating not toward the powerful, but toward the principled. Tonight, for the first time, they saw the difference. The ballroom had finally gone quiet, not the uneasy, shifting silence from earlier, but a deeper one. A silence of reckoning, a silence of recognition. Elias stood in its center, the stain on his suit now dried into a dark, permanent reminder of how the night began. But his presence had grown so steady, so commanding, that even the stain felt insignificant, like a single raindrop on a mountain. Around him, guests waited, not for drama, not for spectacle, for clarity. Security stepped back, giving him room, not protection, just space for the truth to land. The young woman in black remained closest, her posture lifted not by status, but by courage. Claire's sobs had quieted into small, broken breaths. Her husband stared at the floor as if the marble itself had judged him. Elias took one slow breath, then spoke. "Tonight," he said, "was never about a deal." The words rippled through the crowd. It wasn't about contracts or money or influence. It was about what people show you when they believe you have nothing to offer them. Every person who had laughed earlier seemed to shrink. "Power doesn't reveal character," he continued. "Moments like these do when you think no one is watching, and that your actions have no cost." The pianist lowered his gaze. A woman near the bar wiped at her eyes. Someone in the back whispered, "He's right." Elias looked toward Claire and her husband, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but honestly. "I didn't raise my voice tonight," he said, "because I didn't need to. Respect isn't taken by shouting. It's measured by how you carry yourself when others try to strip it away." His tone deepened just slightly. "And dignity?" He let the question hang. Dignity is not theirs to give, and it was never theirs to take. A hush fell even deeper, almost reverent. He stepped forward once, unhurried, as the crowd instinctively made space. "You tried to humiliate a man you believed had no power," he said, addressing the room at large. "But all you did was reveal how little power you had over yourselves." Claire covered her face again, breaking. Elias exhaled not a sigh, but closure. "Let tonight be a reminder," he said softly, "that silence is not weakness, it's control. And respect, true respect, begins where assumptions end." The chandeliers above flickered a final time, stabilizing into a warm glow, as if sealing the moment. Elias turned toward the doors. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Every person in that ballroom would remember the night a stain was thrown on his suit, and he answered it not with vengeance, but with standards. And that was the real power.